Hello. You are viewing Cathode Ray Zone at the movies and on TV with me, Milton Lawson, and publisher, founder, and whatever Grand Poobah, Daniel Kaufman, in sunny near Miami.
That's right. Somewhere in an undisclosed location near Miami.
I would definitely prefer to be in your region. I'm from Houston, Texas, and it's quite humid here in early July.
And not that far from you is this god-awful disaster, no?
Yes. It's on the other side of San Antonio for me. So yeah, it's
one of the worst things I've seen. I mean,
Yeah.
just flat out, what, over 20 kids dead?
That seems to be the latest estimate. Yeah.
60 people. I guess in the big city, you don't get that kind of flash flood, but
Not exactly like that, but we do get very quick rising water, and Houston is such a heavily sort of freewayed and off-ramped system. There are a lot of off-ramps that kind of dip, and we're at a low elevation to begin with. So there are areas in the city that flood very quickly.
even in the city proper, you flood.
Yes. Yeah. Because I mean, one of the nicknames for Houston is the Bayou City because there's a bayou that runs by us.
So we are here today to discuss this magnificent piece of work, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds.
Got my copy as well.
Written by Mr. Lawson, and the art's by Eric Whalen. And I thought we would just talk about it for a while, and maybe learn a bit more about it. I do recommend everyone pick it up. Milton, is this the sort of thing you just type it into Amazon and they can buy it there, or is there a preferred storefront that you like people to use?
At the moment, the only way to get the book is to go to orsonwellscomic.com. In the future, Amazon may be in the offering, but at the moment, just directly from orsonwellscomic.com.
Okay, that will be, when this posts, that will be in the description at the bottom so that people will know. I have a bunch of prepared questions, and so I'm happy to just launch into them. So the first thing I would like is if maybe you could give some background. So the genesis of the idea, the interaction with the Welles estate, which you had to do for rights-related reasons, and then the art, a little bit maybe about the artist.
Okay. Sure. So the genesis of the idea, I really don't remember precisely how the varying elements came together. The way I kind of view it in retrospect is it was just kind of inevitable because I'm a lifelong science fiction fan. I'm a lifelong Orson Welles fan. And as a comic book creator, you're always looking to combine passions and interests. And at some point when I was trying to riff on potential project ideas, those two elements just sort of merged. And I pitched it off of some of my trusted friends in the game, so to speak. And they were intrigued, and that sort of gave me the permission to keep developing it further. And we had a bit of a history with the project. We had an initial version that we put out for Kickstarter, and it actually did not succeed for complicated reasons. But
wait, before this round of crowdfunding, you'd done a previous crowd.
I did a previous round of crowdfunding, and it was just too ambitious in scope and magnitude in terms of the finances for someone who had never delivered a Kickstarter before. Just the target goal was just too big, so we just didn't get anywhere near it. Then there was some momentary experiences of it with a independent publisher, and those didn't conclude, let's just say, satisfactorily. and so the property came back to me, and now I'm essentially self-publishing it under my label 281 Studio, and we launched a Kickstarter campaign for it a few months ago, and we're about 75% delivered on all of the folks who pre-ordered it.
Yeah, I'm one of them. So, and it's a beautiful book, and I also got some additional goodies because I supported it at the sort of the higher level.
Mhm.
Um, could you talk a little bit about the involvement of the Wells estate? Why are they involved? I'm assuming it has to do with rights. And then, what was the nature of their involvement, and how did that work with your work?
So at some point over the life cycle of the project, the inevitable question is, if you've got a comic um, based on a real life figure with their name in the title and their likeness, um, what is considered fair use and what is not? And for a couple of years there, I became an amateur lawyer expert in, and all of the relevant laws in this are primarily based out of California. So I had to learn some case law on it and read some journals. Apparently, some of the most relevant cases involve the Three Stooges. One of them involves, believe it or not, Paris Hilton. And so I just kind of learned a lot. And setting aside, the specific legal questions, eventually we did enter into a collaboration, and we do have the blessing of the estate for the project, which is very fortunate for us. And we're currently working with the estate to perhaps expand the life of this thing into other media formats as well.
Yeah, I was going to say the relationship with them actually wound up being productive for you, didn't it? It wasn't just a matter of getting permissions.
Right. Yeah. They've been at the forefront of helping to sort of spread the word and branch it out. And so yeah.
So is the Wells estate, is it a little bit like the Tolkien people? Do they sort of have a do they have a bunch of creatives and people that are involved in sort of managing or consulting on Wells related projects, or are
I'm
they
not
literally just an estate?
I'm not fully dialed into all of the specifics of the estate. I know that one of the people heavily involved in managing the estate also manages some similar estates from some famous filmmakers and famous authors, and so I think they've sort of got two jobs that they try to develop new projects and properties and opportunities for the things that they own and have copyrights to, etc. And then they just try to police, bad unauthorized stuff out there.
Right. Right. There's a part of any of those kinds of estates. There's going to be a part that's just there to hunt down copyright violations and other sorts of things, right?
Sure, yeah.
But like with the Tolkien estate, because there's so many new properties being made within under the with Tolkien, using Tolkien properties, that I'm assuming they have a whole creative arm as well, because they have to coordinate with all of these writers and directors and producers, and so if the Wells estate, how are they helping you in terms of these potential future media projects? Are they
Well,
basically making connections for you, or like what are they doing?
to a certain degree, I'm not exactly sure how many things I'm at liberty to say, but the things I can say is just, you know, they have experience in dealing with, the Hollywood system in
Understood.
general from various different dimensions. Like, for example, one of the most successful uses of Wells in media in recent years was actually a hip hop music track, or maybe hip hop is not the right genre label, but like electronic music.
Hmm.
There's a DJ called, I think he's called Logic, and he had a really cool music track that featured a lot of Orson Welles audio from the movie F for Fake.
Huh,
And so
fascinating.
you've got his narration going along with some music, and it became an extremely popular track.
Huh.
And the estate was involved in sort of bringing that to fruition.
Maybe tell us a little bit about the artist, Eric Whalen.
So the artist in the book is Eric Whalen. He's based out of Michigan. He is a super talented artist. His one of his primary gifts as a comic book artist, he's really good at storytelling, and that's something that is not a skill that all people who are good at drawing or aspects of illustration, they don't necessarily have that skill. So it's a very rare and important one in the craft. And I met him through a mutual friend in independent comics. He drew a book called Spirit Drifters with a friend of mine, Rick Quinn, and I met him at a convention several years ago, and that was when the first iteration of the Wells project was kind of percolating, and I thought he would be great. Initially, I was going to get multiple artists, and Eric was going to do just one chapter.
Maybe say something a little bit about that. That was an earlier form of the project. Could you talk a little bit about what the original format was going to be?
Yeah, the original format on the first Kickstarter, every chapter in the story was going to be illustrated by a different illustrator, and the part of the story reason for that is each one of the chapters was going to be either loosely or directly inspired visually by an existing film in the Orson Welles canon. And so I wanted to try to pitch.
That's very ambitious. Yeah, that's ambitious.
I found that out. That's
How many artists would you have needed, assuming you achieved this exactly how you wanted? How many artists would you have needed?
At the most ambitious version of the project, it would have been 12, but we scaled it down to like maybe 8 at the time. But yeah, it was very volatile, and so ultimately that particular vision changed when we sort of reimagined the project as just like one singular thing with one artist, and I begged Eric to be the one, and he mistakenly agreed.
Was he originally going to be one of the many?
Yeah, he was originally going to be one of the many.
How far down the road did you get on that version of it before you said, "There's no way I'm going to be able to get this many artists"?
Basically, we had each prospective artist, not all of them because they weren't all available at the time, but most of them just drew one thing. They drew like a page or a concept piece, and we posted each one of those to give sort of the different stylistic options. But then the funny thing is on these crowdfunding things, they are somewhat similar to Hollywood movies in the sense that even though the campaigns are scheduled for like 2 to 3 to 4 weeks, usually within the first day, you kind of know if you're going to succeed or not. And I knew within the first day that we weren't going to succeed.
Oh, so you didn't get very far along. In other words, you didn't invest a whole bunch into this and then say, "Oh my God, we got to redo the whole thing."
Right. I mean, I still it was a month of frustrating effort of like trying to change the narrative, trying to get some traction. But ultimately, in the back of my head, I knew that particular thing was doomed.
Yeah. All right. So the core, look, and this is sort of my second sort of question or area of questioning that I wanted to sort of get on with you, and that is that. So I had a notion of what this was going to be before I read it, partly because I know you and because we've talked about it and all of that. It turned out being quite different from what I expected.
Yes.
And so what I want to sort of ask you is, why you didn't do what I expected, and I don't mean it the way it sounds. It's not a
Yeah.
criticism, but so look, the obvious conceit. Look at the title: Orson, Warrior of the World's Welles. Okay, Orson Welles, Warrior of the Worlds. Right. So we all know, or if we don't know, we can find out if we Google it, that Orson Welles did these famous radio broadcasts of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds that people mistook for a real reporting of a Martian invasion. And it actually caused some hysteria, right? And so when I saw this and I heard about this and you told me about it, and you were very good to not give me too much details ahead of time. You never spoiled the book for me, even though we talked about it 100 times. My thought was, okay, what a clever conceit. He's going to take a fictional broadcast and then that people took as being non-fictional and then make a story in which it really was non-fictional. Okay. So I thought this thing was going to be just about, basically was going to be the War of the World story,
Mm-hmm.
but with Wells in it. And it turns out to be real. And then I guess maybe this is the answer. That's kind of the obvious thing to do, right? But you didn't do that at all. I mean, you started with that sort of basic conceit.
Right.
But this war that he's involved in is not just the Martians invading Earth. This war is galactic.
Right.
The scale is enormous. And so I guess I'm wondering, was this something where you started with the smaller idea and it grew, or was that never your idea to simply exploit the conceit? It was always to do this huge galactic, galaxy-wide thing.
There may have been a brief moment where a smaller scale version might have happened, but as it is with comics, independent comics, even before you start outlining, if you're really on your game as a creator, at least someone at my quote unquote level, which is towards the bottom of the pyramid, such that it is, that you have to factor in, you have to factor in logistics and economics at the conceptual level. Like even before you start outlining, you have ideas of like the kind of artist or maybe even a specific artist who could draw it. And so I immediately pivoted to the concept of, I will make this thing larger and have my cake and eat it too by only asking artists to commit a small number of pages each. Like I can get.
That's when you had the original model of the multiple.
The original model.
Okay.
So once those logistics were in line, the story had to, just by its very nature, go through like each one of those chapters being inspired by one of Wells's films. It sort of implied a broader, canvas upon which to sort of play around with. And so that's where I took it from a very early point in the conception.
So let me just be clear. Was your initial, before you even really started getting seriously thinking about implementation, was your original idea just, wouldn't this be interesting? The thing that he broadcast that was fiction that everybody took as real actually turned out to be real after all. Is that how the original idea started?
I think the original idea probably started more along the lines of, there are handfuls of examples in comics in particular where you take a known figure and you give them a secret life. Like the most famous example of this, and this isn't from comics, this is from prose, I think, is Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter.
Yeah.
And so pretty early in the concept is like, there's a whole series of books about Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. And so I wanted to have something that extended beyond the initial moment, because if he's going to have this secret life, that's just going to be sort of like the origin moment of it. But there's going to
You
be
wanted it to be a secret life, not just one event
right.
that
Yes.
turned out to be real, but wasn't. You wanted this to be like a parallel career that he had.
Right.
Gotcha.
That's
Okay.
sort of draws where everything else comes from.
So, but given that in part the large scope of it was due to your initial idea of having multiple artists,
Right.
when you wound up having to just use one artist, did you say, "Oh my God, I shouldn't have made this thing so big," or was it not a problem?
It really wasn't a problem because at that point it was conceived not as a graphic novel, but as a series of individual, floppy comics. And one of the more negative aspects of current comics, both in the mainstream and sometimes on the independent side, is there's this concept in comics. It's called decompression, where they take a story, which back in the old days of 60s and 70s comics would have just been in one issue, 20 pages of story. Nowadays, a lot of writers will take something that would traditionally fit in that 20-page format and they stretch it out to a 100-page format. It's the same amount of story, but you live inside of the story beats a little more cinematically. Um, but a lot of people don't like one aspect of that. And one aspect of that is that you just get a lot less of a story.
It's
And
a lot of filler.
yeah, a lot of filler. Yeah, it usually feels like it's like a 5-issue arc. Issue 1 is really jam packed to make it exciting and get you hooked in, and then really it's filler for like 3 issues, and then the 4th issue ends on a good, climactic hook, and then the finale may or may not be, really good. Um, and I wanted to avoid that. I wanted each issue to really hit and kind of stand on its own as much as it could, even within this broader context. You could imagine back in the days of like classic science fiction stories, like, you know, your Flash Gordons, your Sherlock Holmeses and those sorts of things. You didn't necessarily have to have the long arc. You could just get the one chapter. And I don't really fully have that in this, because each chapter has a distinct story on its own for sure, but you do kind of have to read it in order because there is this long arc of a thing that happens from A to Z.
Was it originally going to be an anthology of stories without an overarching narrative? Was it originally going to be that way?
It was somewhat. There was still going to be an overarching narrative, but it was going to be a little dialed down in the intensity in terms of the narrative. Each one was going to be a little bit more standalone. And yeah, I did sort of call it anthology like. So
But this is not. I mean, the final product is really not.
Yeah.
It's
It's
a
really just
single
one big,
story,
yeah.
but the chapters do have very distinct identities. Even down to even down, it's amazing. It's the same artist, but through clever use of black and white, and then also even things like levels of detail and all sorts of things. I mean, he really does manage to have each chapter have a particular visual template.
Yeah.
That kind of makes it that gives it its identity. That's actually, I think, really, really well done. So let me ask you, just because you raised it and it's interesting, and people just may not, I'm assuming a lot of people are going to watch this, or people who just are interested in comics generally. Why did that start? It would seem to me the financial incentives in the industry would be against doing what you just described that they're doing, and that is padding these things to make them, just simply because the bigger the thing is, the more expensive it is to make and the more you have to charge for it, right? And comics are directed at an audience that is not the highest income brackets of the country, right? It
Yeah.
tends to be younger people. So, what was the reason for that development of this kind of inflation of, if you
So
know?
yeah. Well, there are a number. Obviously, there are a number of different factors, but basically, what happened in the '90s, there was this fantastic comic series, which just this weekend had a Netflix season drop, which is The Sandman, and The Sandman um, does really well at both sides of that form of storytelling. There's a long arc of the whole thing, um, but there's also each individual comic is a satisfying read. But once um, once they started getting far enough along, and this book had this reputation, the publisher started putting out these collected editions of 6 issues per trade paperback, and those things just blew up and
Mm.
sort of created an entire new dimension to the industry because collected trades were not very big in the industry at that time. And so
This before or after Watchmen?
this was after a little bit after Watchmen.
Because Watchmen was also separate issues that were collected,
Yes,
right?
yes. And so between Sandman and Watchmen, this thing that could also be distributed in bookstores became this sort of financial
Mm,
carrot that
mm.
everyone went after. So basically, a lot of
Because
money.
Barnes and Noble didn't carry comics,
Right, right,
right? You used to have to go to the stationery store or the dime store for the comics,
right.
and so now you could go to Barnes and Noble
Yes,
and you could buy comics that are bound.
right. And so now in mainstream comics, the sort of the idea is they're not writing to the issue, they're writing to the trade. So each
That's
unit that you get is really incomplete and a lot of times unsatisfying.
how is how has that affected legacy properties? So, like, look, I mean, like, take the Avengers, right?
Hmm.
Now, the Avengers had some very historically relevant arcs that were later bound.
Right.
So, like, I'm thinking of like the Korvac saga, right? It was eventually bound, but
Yeah.
originally it was over like dozens of issues and not all in the same property, right?
Right. Right.
Um, um, so with this new model, what's happened to the legacy series? The ones, the Spider-Mans, the Avengers, the Captain Americas, all this sort of stuff. Have they suffered for it, or have they simply been able to ignore it because they're so big?
I would say they've not. Well, it depends on
Because you
which
can't
angle you look.
anthologize 50 years
Yeah.
of Thor or whatever, right? I mean,
Yeah. Well, what they when they do it best, they hit those arcs that are very resonant and popular. And so if someone is new to a character and goes Spider-Man, I'm a fan. Where should I start? And someone will go like, well, here's some classic, Lee and Ditko stuff. Here's some 80s classic stuff. Why don't you read the Craven's Last Hunt? Why don't you read, these
I see. So
particular
it's an
arcs?
entry point into what otherwise is an almost impossible to enter
Right.
because it's so big and long
Right.
and
Yeah.
okay, very interesting. So it hasn't hurt the. You don't think this has hurt the industry, this development?
It's been a blessing and a curse. It's been a financial boon, and it's where stores make a lot of money, and Barnes and Noble makes a lot of money. But sometimes, especially mainstream superhero comics, they do these arcs, and the other bane of existence is the so-called events. Um, you know, you know, if something like the Korvac saga bubbled up in a ideas meeting nowadays, it wouldn't even be its own arc. It would be considered an event, and there would be all kinds of branding, and they would involve like little spin-offs. So the whole property of the Korvac saga, if it happened now, would actually spread across like 100 issues.
So you would franchise within the franchise
Yes,
almost.
yes, exactly.
Okay, I'm getting it now. So this is just death for anyone who wants to be a traditional episodic comic writer.
Yes,
Forget it.
yes,
Forget it. And if you do want to make episodic stuff, it better be bundleable, right? And under
yes,
some appealing
yes,
arc.
yes. Yeah, it's
Okay.
all about the arc now.
Okay. I get it. I get it. Fascinating. Okay. Here's something I thought while reading this. And again, this isn't a criticism. It's just not what I expected. And I wondered about the motivations. And now that I'm thinking about the original H.G. Wells story, this would be true of it as well, but less so than yours. This strikes me as having very blurry genre lines.
Mm-hmm.
Look, you look at the cover, it's like, okay, it's science fiction. But a lot of it strikes me almost as crossover to fantasy. Some of the, and I can say maybe a few things about what some of the elements are that made me think that. Some of the technologies.
Yeah, you put them in quotes. Yeah.
Strike me as fantastical.
Mm-hmm.
And by fantastical, I mean these are not things that are even reasonably predictable with the long future, far into the future. The way, let's put it this way. Look, warp drives are probably never going to happen, right? For all sorts of reasons to do with the theory of relativity.
Yeah.
However, I still think that warp engines, like in Star Trek, are science fiction. Why? Because you could see how this,
Sure.
if it turned out that some of our scientific knowledge wasn't quite right, you could see how, that might work, right?
Right.
But some of the technologies here, I don't think are that category. I actually think it's a three-way genre bleed: science fiction, fantasy, and I also see a lot of superhero elements in here, especially in the character of Wells himself. He's doing stuff that it strikes me would if you actually imagine somebody doing it would require superhuman ability. And also the way he's just, yes, he's a warrior of the world, but he just knows how to use all this technology. He knows how to jump out of planes. He knows how to sort of so this is just a long-winded way of saying it surprised me a little bit in terms of my genre expectations. And I'm wondering to what extent this is deliberate and to what extent and what some of the reasons are for having it be more genre generous, let's say, instead of tighter sci-fi.
Yeah. So I would say, there's a certain degree, all of this stuff is always mysterious, even to the people that do it themselves. The intentionality is, from my point of view, I struggle with the fantasy genre from a creative point of view.
I know you do, and that's why I wondered about it.
The science fiction genre is what draws me the most. And
more than superheroes?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
And I'll take this in two different areas: the fantasy sci-fi and then the superhero thing. The fantasy sci-fi thing, I've written some prose sci-fi with the intention of submitting it to various publications in the industry that feeds into, anthologies, that feeds into opportunities for writing novels and so forth.
Right.
And, within sci-fi, they've got all of these sub-genre labels of like hard sci-fi and
space opera.
Yeah. And so the level of rigor that you bring the science to bear on a given concept. I think on a project by project basis, you can sort of recalibrate that. And like, for example, one of my favorite sci-fi writers is Neil Stevenson. And he started out doing cyberpunk stuff. Probably his most famous book is Snow Crash. And he did a lot of.
Didn't he write Cryptonomicon?
Yeah, he wrote Cryptonomicon.
I thought that was his most famous because that's the one I know.
It may be. But like Cryptonomicon, I think that might be a good example.
It's I think of him as a fantasy writer, funnily enough.
Oh yeah. I think he's done a few, but Cryptonomicon, yeah, that kind of does a little bit of a genre bleed as well. But especially one of his more recent books called Seven Eves is very rigorous on the science. And it's one of these things similar to, I don't know, you remember the movies that came out almost there a couple of movies that came out within a few months of each other, of like a killer asteroid hitting Earth,
Meteor, and then there was a bunch of them, right?
Yeah. Armageddon and Deep Impact, and like Armageddon was a Michael Bay film, and so it was mainly just an action vehicle. The other one, Deep Impact, it was more of a character study, but there was a little more thought into the science on that one. And Neil Stephenson's Seven Eves, you can almost smell the like NASA guidebooks and technical documentation that he consumed in preparation for that book, kind of lurking behind it. A lot of the details in it feel like astronaut procedural stuff. I mean, you can tell this guy knows the specifics of everything, and I would consider like that to be, him and Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. They were of an era where the discipline for the rigorousness of the science was very respectful, and that's kind of what they focused on. And I love that stuff as well. I've done some projects that are not all that way, but a little more intentionally conceived in actual concepts of science. For a brief period of time at college, I was a physics major. I got to my junior year and then couldn't understand quantum physics and bailed out. And no one had the decency to tell me, oh wait, but none of us understand it. Just do the math and keep going.
So the math wasn't the problem for you, because for most people, what ultimately drives them out of the physics is they get to a level of math that they're simply not able to do.
Right. And like I was in a class, and literally one of the problems was something about a particle traveling across two different metal plates and like a valley, and like the way that it vibrates. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this. People that know quantum physics probably know the problem by heart. And sort of the conceit of the problem was like, there's this valley, and in this valley, due to the properties of the electrical charges and so forth, this given type of particle cannot dip into that little valley. So solve for the probability of that particle being in that valley. And I'm like, well, you just told me it can't exist there, and they're like, but no, if you look at the math, there's a probability that it would. And that static, in my brain, like, wait, you're telling me it can't exist, but you're
not possibly me, P means not possibly probably P.
Yes. Yeah. And so that was pretty much when I pulled the ripcord and yeah, I'm out. But then,
so you've done some more hard sci-fi of your own.
Right.
But you don't think this is genre stretching, because we discussed this and you were a little surprised by my characterization.
No, I know. once you said it, it's not all that surprising. But from my point of view, the way that I kind of think of it, I just think of it as softer sci-fi. And if you drugged me and tried to get me to give some sort of scientific theoretical rationale on each one of the
No, genre categories are look. Genre categories are conventional. I mean, they're not.
Yeah.
So I mean, and they have a certain use, and then they have a lot of uses that are really actually not helpful at all. So it's like,
Yeah,
I'm not using it in sort of any sort of gatekeeping way.
right.
It's just more I'm interested, right?
Yeah.
Um, um, like, would you take Flash Gordon to be science fiction or fantasy?
I would
I think
I would
that's
think it was
I think
sci-fi.
that's space fantasy.
What's that?
I think that's space fantasy.
Yeah,
Flash Gordon.
that I think is a fair label. But to me, I still think of it as science fiction because, you know, there's always some sort of like hardware that, you know, that they're trying to, you know, break into or use. And
Yeah,
it may emanate some sort of like quasi
yeah,
fantasy like energy capability. But like to me, the difference is like you know, Gandalf's staff. Okay, we know Gandalf's staff. There's no way it can do what it does. So
right.
it's magic. You know, it's magic. But these other things, like this gun doing weird things, maybe it can. So
Well, and also, I mean, to be fair, I mean, again, it's not a criticism, so we don't need to be fair, but I mean, there's a lot of definitions of science fiction. One of the definitions, this is clearly science fiction, and that is um, stories in which the technology or the science are central to driving the plot or the action.
Mhm.
That's why Star Wars is not science fiction, but Star Trek is. Okay, so Star
Sure.
Wars, it doesn't. The technology doesn't matter. They have it, but
Right.
they might as well just be in a western, right? I mean, like,
Mhm.
you know, it's not. It's not plot driving, right?
Right.
In the way that technology in Star Trek is.
But it
And
is
in
a
this, I'm
but
sorry. Go ahead.
it is an important thematic element. I mean, it is about what the technology does to the people. The specifics of it or
Well, it's
how it's
about what
made.
power does to the people.
Yeah,
I mean, we don't need to
it's
argue
one
about
element. It's one element. Let's
it. Here, the science and the technology is absolutely central to the plot driving. I mean, there's no. I mean, it's a huge element. Um, I think it's more that the technologies that you describe have such a sort of a creative element. This is actually going to bring me to my last topic, which I'm not ready to get onto yet, but this will connect to the last topic. The technologies are so exotic in terms of the imaginative kind of ideas behind them
Mhm.
that they feel more like magic to me than technology, even though they're ostensibly the product of technology in the book.
Right.
So maybe it's more like it tastes like fantasy, even if it isn't necessarily fantasy, right?
Yeah.
But I love fantasy, so that's not a criticism. Now, what about the superhero part?
So the superhero part, that is an interesting thing. And I
Orson Welles seems like a superhero to me in this book.
yeah, and so Wells is sort of a superhero to me in terms of like artists I admire. So I put him on a pedestal. And so the way that I view the real life Orson Welles is not all of that, uh, you know, massively different than what, you know, a character in Superman might view Superman, like a regular person would view Superman. You know, there seems to be, you know, heroic aspects. Now, of course, I'm an adult and I've dug into his biography deeply. I'm aware of the man's flaws. They are plenty. I do try to um, have somewhat of a nuanced take on him, even within this kind of comic book sci-fi or sci-fi fantasy uh, uh, sort of environment, even within that. But it's not a primary focus of any of the storytelling. It's just, you know, It's there if you're very aware of the specific peculiarities of Wells. But I kind of think of him, oddly enough, in this story. Like if I were to do, like if I wasn't me and someone else had a similar idea that was younger than me, I think like Tom Cruise would be an example, because this dude does all of these stunts and crazy things, and it just doesn't seem all that crazy that, like, if there was a invasion from aliens and Tom Cruise needed to learn how to jump off of a spaceship,
That's your next book.
he would do it. He would figure out how to do it.
But I do think, I mean, it's a good example, but I do think that the Tom Cruise characters you see in a lot of these films are very much superhero-ish characters, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's really fascinating, actually, what you said about the way in which he's a superhero to you versus why I thought that from reading the book. So I wanted to split that into two. I'd like to ask you, and I have no interest in revisionism and trying to find things fault with Wells. In what ways from his actual biography do you find him superhero-ish, aside from his ridiculous skill and talent? Are there particular aspects of the biography that strike you as heroic? And maybe give us a few.
Yeah. Well, I'll take one dimension that's there's the artistic, and then there's the impact on the world / maybe political side. On the impact on the world and political side, he contributed a lot to American theater in terms of providing opportunities for people, and specifically, he did this famous production of Macbeth in collaboration with the WPA, where he did an all-black cast for Macbeth.
I didn't know any of this. I had no even idea that he was a big stage guy. Like, I didn't know that.
Oh, okay. So there's two angles to that. So like, this.
So he was upfront on race issues.
He was very upfront on race issues, and like he would mention that in his in his radio programs and in his just his persona as a entertainer. When he would get interviewed on topics, he was very I think a lot of his opinions stand the test of time very well. He did do some shadow speech writing for FDR. Yeah. Because he was such a great communicator, and it was the era of radio. So that was one dimension of it. And then, but just from the creativity point of view, well, no, back to the political point of view. One other thing is, he, I think, is one of the best examples of an artist in a collaborative medium, dealing with the struggle of art versus commerce, dealing with the suits, quote unquote, and the Hollywood system, and fighting for independent artistic voices. And when Hollywood shunned him, he paved a way for a do-it-yourself filmmaker career.
So, remind the audience why Hollywood shunned him.
So his first film, there were two reasons. He was lured away from radio with the most generous contract in the history of motion pictures, and everybody within the industry viewed him with skepticism. Like, who's this kid who's never done anything? Why is he getting the greatest director's contract ever? So they eyed him with suspicion from the jump. And then when he chose with his first film to make William Randolph Hearst the target of a scathing portrayal, He not only risked his own film, he not only risked his own studio, he put the entire studio system itself at risk, because Hearst got so angered by the prospect of this film being released. He threatened the entire Hollywood system and told, the heads of all of the studios, I'm going to hold you all accountable for this film. And so there was a period of time where it looked like Citizen Kane was going to be erased from existence. They were literally going to burn the negative. And it was through his persuasive power, as someone standing up for, freedom of speech and artistic rights, he somehow convinced these studios to go against what was in their financial interest to keep this film in existence.
So Hearst could blackball people the way Ed Sullivan could. He had that much power.
Right. Yeah, because he ran all the papers, and not only could he like blackball people, he had a dossier on every star or starlet, and like, hey, if you do this thing I don't like, I'm gonna release these salacious pictures of you.
Wow. Yeah, what gave me the impression, so I know none of this about Welles's biography. I knew he was blackballed by Hearst, but I didn't know a lot of the rest of it. I had no idea about all of his the work he did in the theater and the supporting of people. I didn't know all that. The reason he comes off to me as a superhero in this is because he acts like one. I mean, did Welles have the real person have such physical prowess? Was he somebody who was so adept with? I mean, in this, he's jumping out of like airplanes and shit, and he knows how to use all the weapons, and he's and he's so adept. That's what gave me the sense of a superhero. Is basically him just sort of flying around all over the place.
Yeah.
Like some kind of like galactic commando. That sort of made me think that this had a lot of very superheroish qualities.
So as an early stage actor, he had this capacity to adapt to the needs of the moment. And, even though he's a very young actor, he would often be cast to play older characters because of just the nature of his prodigious voice. He just sounded.
He had a gravitas that was more than his years, in a sense, right?
Yeah. And so there were other elements to his capacity to adapt to the needs of the moment. And I sort of just absurdly inflated that capacity into the context of, okay, now you're going to be put in a galactic war. You're going to have the same sort of quick learner ability that you have when it comes to filmmaking and directing and so forth.
I have one last area of questioning I want to ask you about, but there's something just occurred to me now as we're talking, and I'm just like flipping through this thing. This thing is dense as hell.
Yes.
I'm not, it's not a criticism. This is just, I mean it descriptively.
Right.
Look, I write a lot. I don't know how to write something like this. How does this not become a fucking mess? Is it all storyboarded? Do you have like 25 outlines? Like, the amount of detail and the density of it, this could have been completely incoherent, I guess is what I'm saying. And I've read things that try to do something like this that are completely incoherent. Is it luck, or do you have a method to write something that's dense like this? Because this escapes my ability, this level of density.
Well, some folks would argue with your premise that it doesn't go off the rails, but if you've
had people tell you it's incoherent, I don't really.
Actually, no, I haven't. But I mean, I do think I could imagine the the hypothetical reader that would say that about this or any other of my books, because density is one part of what I bring to the table as a comic creator. And a lot of that has to do with just like storytelling greed on my part. Like, I kind of feel like I'm sort of trying to cram a prose novel's worth of stuff into a medium that is not intended for it. So
I can't leave this great idea out, that sort of thing.
right. Yeah. Yeah. And, there is a virtue in like pushing the efficiency of storytelling, and audiences in every form of media right now are a lot more sophisticated than they were, just in terms of just pure like visual literacy, being able to comprehend aspects of visual storytelling. Like, one related anecdote I would say is like, back in towards the end of his career, Stanley Kubrick was known to be fascinated by television commercial storytelling, and he would admire how much advertising directors, how much story they could fit in a 30-second bit of cinema, basically. And so I end up trying to do the same thing with comic books. I try to get the most I can out of a page, the most I can out of a panel, the most I can out of a chapter.
Well, it's dense, it's layered. Things keep unpeeling that you don't expect, and somehow it all hangs together. I mean, it's quite a remarkable achievement. Here's the last question I have, and I've kind of my thinking on this question has evolved over time as I've been thinking about the book since I read it. I started to wonder whether the whole damn thing is actually just a metaphor. Whether actually what this book really is just about is your absolute adoration and love of cinema. And let me explain what made me think that. The two elements that really stood out to me. One, the most powerful weapon that they are threatened with is one that steals people's voices. And his most powerful strategy and means of defense is by the recruitment of great directors, film directors, Kurosawa and Kubrick especially. And I think there were more than that. Was those the only two, or was there more?
There are a few others, but let's keep them secret here.
And that's what made me start wondering, wait a minute. Is in a sense, Milton's sense, sort of telling a fable. The point is actually entirely has nothing to do with what this is ostensibly about. Now, even if that's not the case,
right?
Could you speak to this aspect of it, though? Because those two things really do stand out. What science fiction story has, how are we going to defend against the evil aliens? I know, we'll get Stanley Kubrick and Akira Kurosawa.
Right, exactly.
What's the terrible enemy death ray? Oh, it steals your voice.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Maybe talk to that, and to what degree is this meant to be a kind of a fable or a metaphor kind of?
Yeah, I hope, and now this is tricky. I don't want to dictate an interpretation of the work.
No, of course not.
But I definitely feel there's like two layers of what you're asking here. On the one layer, I hope that there are multiple metaphors and allegories to my personal views on cinema, and my views on Wells, and Wells's views on things, and himself to a certain degree, which I may or may not have succeeded on. A lot of my love of cinema consumes a lot of my life in general. But I do feel like the stakes and the battles, which within the realm of filmmaking and just general artistic creation itself, you know, given the state of the world, may not seem all that crucial or important at a given moment in time. But they do serve as good stand-ins for similar struggles in the world at large. So I think if some of the commentaries that I may be making on cinema itself, not just in terms of the medium, but the way that the medium is managed and how the people who work in it achieve their visions or don't achieve their visions is one element
It's
to it.
not just cinema. I'm realizing, and maybe I want to expand this a little bit because the Shakespeare chapter, A, it's one of the strongest chapters in the book. B, it reverberates throughout, even after the chapter's over.
Mm-hmm.
Is this really is the thesis the greatest defenders of civilization are the artists?
That could be a useful thesis. I'll neither confirm or deny.
No, I'm not
It's
asking.
true, but
I just love when I wondered whether that was explicit, whether in a sense part of what you were explicitly doing was something like this, or is this just your toolbox? So
I think
this is, you know what I mean?
yeah. But for me, one of the interesting things is it works in both directions. The direction you're talking about is like using a story or an element in a story to convey some larger idea. Um, but the weird thing is, it also works in reverse to me, both in terms of when I'm doing like a more hard sci-fi story, and then also in this. Like if I'm doing a more hard sci-fi story, like one of my previous stories is Thompson Heller, Detective Interstellar, private detective, goes around the galaxy. And when I'm telling those kinds of stories, whenever I introduce some sort of fictional technology or something, in order for it to work in my head, I've got to like expand it out well beyond what the actual story needs are. I have to like justify it in my head, like, well, why was this thing created? What set of sources of like scientific development and economic development and social pressures led to this particular thing getting created? And in the Wells book, there's a similar thing at work here. Like once you just accept the one line premise, filmmaker becomes Flash Gordon, let's just put it that way. I then have to interrogate that idea to my own satisfaction. Like, well, why would a filmmaker be a heroic, fighter against, these alien invaders? Why would they maybe be useful in that context? And so trying to answer that question is also part of what dictated the structure of the story.
Understood. It just really struck me when I got to the end. The first thing I thought was this whole thing is a love letter to the artists he loves.
It kind of is. I'll plead guilty to that one for sure.
It's not guilty. It's beautiful. And the fact that can come out of what is ostensibly such a 50s pulp sci-fi kind of story, which tended always to be really superficial and maybe would have like a anti-communist element or something.
Yeah.
To use that framework to really sort of express these kinds of feelings about the things you love is really terrific. And I felt it too. Like by the end of this thing, I mean, I already loved Kubrick and I already loved Kurosawa and I already loved Shakespeare, but like this book actually kind of almost reawoke a lot of my feelings about them, just because your enthusiasm comes through in it. Like, it's just, I don't know. I hope you're proud of this.
I am very much so. It took a lot to get there, but yeah,
it's magnificent, right? I mean, it's really magnificent. All right, Milton. Well, we've gone over an hour, and maybe we should call it here. I've asked everything I had written down. Um, do you have anything you want to add before we finish up?
Just I want to thank you for interrogating the book so deeply and taking the time to think deeply about it and come up with good questions. I really appreciate that. And I just say, for everyone else out there who might be interested,
Buy the book.
OrsonWellesComic.com, now available.
Are you doing any other media coming up for the book? Any other promotion that we could watch or?
I don't know if we're going to post this in time, but hopefully we will. I'm very privileged. I have an event coming up at a really, a landmark treasure of Houston culture, the one surviving classic movie theater, the kind that you imagine that would have like an organ and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We recently got restored architecturally. It was in peril of being lost forever, but the community rallied around it, and it's been restored. And they show all these great throwback movies, genre movies, and on Sunday, July 20th, they're doing a screening of Citizen Kane, and I'm going to introduce the film, and I'll be there selling my book. And it's very personally meaningful to me because that is the very theater that I first saw Citizen Kane in, and it basically launched my whole writing career. So it's going to be quite a returning home sort of feel to it.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Milton Lawson, thank you. The book is Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. Buy it.
Yeah.
And buy more for your friends.
Indeed. Thank you much, Dan.
All right. Take care.